James, and I'd like to welcome you to this Oracle Outlook video reading. In this video, I'm going to be doing a reading that centers on Yule. And Yule is a pagan holiday, tradition, festivity that begins on December the 21st and continues until January the 1st. And as I say those dates out loud, I'm just realizing that in a couple of weeks, 2021 is going to be coming to an end. I don't know about you, but for me, it seems like this year went by so incredibly fast. And with that in mind, I'm really curious about what the cards have to say as we round out this particular year. So with that in mind, the deck that I'm going to be working with is the Darkness of Light Tarot by Tony DiMauro. If you're feeling like that deck sounds familiar to you, it's because it's the same deck that I used in my previous video where I did a reading around the time period of Samhain and the season of fall. And the reason why I'm using it again is because a lot of you out there really took time to send me wonderful comments about how you appreciated the use of a deck that had, in my opinion, a very distinct pagan flavor and flair to it. So I figured if it's not broke, don't fix it, right? So we are going to be using that deck again. And I will say as a side note, that it is a deck that has become one of my personal favorites. When I got the deck initially, I didn't realize how I was going to bond with it, how I was going to basically really get on with it and love it the way I do. So it has now fast become one of my favorite decks in my collection. And that is saying a lot because I don't know if you realize this or not, but I have a lot of decks in my collection. So for one to come into the collection and kind of just move to the forefront of my affection and getting a lot of use from me, that says a lot. So I really love this deck, and I'm glad that a lot of you enjoy seeing it. So you will continue to see it. So again, I'm working with the Darkness of Light Tarot, and as I always do, I will be leaving information about the deck in the description box below. So now that I've set things up, let's get to the table and see what the Darkness of Light Tarot wants to share with us in terms of what we might need to know, consider, do, or what we might experience as we move through this season of Yule and as we near the end of 2021. And here we are with the cards on the table, and I'm going to take a few moments to shuffle the deck. And as I shuffle the cards, I'm focusing on my question for this reading, and that is, what do we need to know for the time period of Yule, which starts on Tuesday, December the 21st, and ends on New Year's Day. Filming one more time will be good. There we go. And now I'm going to go ahead and cut the deck. Now I'm going to go ahead and fan the cards out. And now I'm going to look through the fan. I'm going to select 5 cards because when I do these video readings, my favorite spread of choice is a line of 5. And I see the last 2 cards over here. Alright, so I've selected the 5 cards. Now I'm going to take the remainder of the deck up and I'm going to move it to one side. Alright. And now I'm going to go ahead and readjust the cards in the order that they were chosen for this line of 5. So now when I do a line of 5, when I use tarot or oracle cards, unlike when I work with Lenormand or Kipper or another system similar to that, those systems, excuse me, what I like to do is I like to give each card a positional meaning. So we'll run through those. So the first position here usually for me represents the origin. I call the origin card. So usually represents something about a situation that we are going to be experiencing potentially. It's like it opens things up, or it could be about like, why are we asking the question that we are asking? So I usually read it one or two ways. The next card here represents our expectations. So now, if I go with the context for this reading, which is what do we need to know about possible experiences through the time period of Yule, then this could be about maybe what are we expecting during this time period? What are our expectations, right? Then the middle card for me usually represents what is the focus or what's at the heart of the matter since it's in the middle of the line. Then card number 4 represents any guidance or advice that this system, in this particular case tarot, wants to offer us that may be helpful in moving us through this particular time period, and then how the situation could be potentially wrapped up or resolved based on whether or not we choose to take the advice being offered, right? For me, when I read the cards, the advice being offered is not something that you need to do, that you should do, that you ought to do. Tarot offers it for your thought and consideration, right? Tarot is neutral, and then what you do with the information is up to you. So you can choose to do something with it, or you could choose not to do something with it. Okay. So now, I'm going to start with the middle card, since I talked about it representing the heart of the matter, or the central issue. Here we have the Queen of Blades. So, first thing that I will say is that it is a court card. So the court cards can be read one or two ways. I choose to read them as they could represent actual people. If that is the case, then the Queen of Blades, of course, could represent a woman, right? And this could be a woman that maybe we have had some sort of difficulty with. That is one way to read that, because the suit of blades can represent problems, troubles, and difficulty. So this could be a problematic woman, a difficult woman, that kind of thing. And it could just be a matter of she may be playing a central role or part in a situation that we are experiencing during this time period. Remember now, this is a specific time period from the time Yule starts until it ends, right? So there may be something about that. Now, if I go with that, then she could, in a different lens, because blades can also represent the mind, she can also represent a person who's very analytical, a very intellectual, a very rational, logical. So that could be if it represents a specific woman, right? Now, another aspect it could be, if we go with the idea that this is still representing a person, sometimes I see this as a person who is divorced, separated, or widowed, right? So it could be a person who's experiencing, moving through a divorce or a separation, that kind of thing. For me, if this is a woman with children, then it could be a woman who's more mature and could be experiencing estrangement from children, because one of the meanings I have for this card is about a mother who has some sort of distance from her children. That's usually from some sort of estrangement, right? So those are all aspects of the card if it can represent an actual person. If it's more metaphorical, because the other way that I read court cards is that they represent some aspect of all of us, and they're asking us to adopt those particular aspects, right? So the first thing that I will say, if I go back to the idea about divorce or separation, then it could just be a matter of either one or two things. Either we are taking a good look and we're giving some serious thought and consideration to either who or what we need to divorce ourselves from during this time period, right? So it could be a matter of like, what do we need to separate ourselves from, or who do we need to separate ourselves from, or what do we need to divorce ourselves from, or who do we need to divorce ourselves from, that kind of energy, right? The other thing I will say about this card, sometimes it can come up when we are in the midst of, since it's in the middle of the line, the midst of making an important decision. And with that, we are being asked to weigh the pros and the cons to help us with the decision-making process. So there is that as well. The other thing I want to offer about the Queen of Blades, if it's not about the divorce and separation aspect, either with a person or a situation, This could just be about going through a process of elimination or removal, those kinds of things. Like, what do we need to eliminate or remove from our lives? Again, that could be kind of another way of saying the whole divorce and separation thing, but sometimes for me, she represents a process of elimination, that kind of thing. I can't help but notice that in the image on the card, she is bare-breasted, so there could be something about being exposed to something, right? So that could be exposure. It could be either someone exposes something about themselves to you, or that you have to give some thought and consideration about an aspect of yourself that you are going to be exposing potentially to other people, right? It could be more of an emotional nature because the top part of her being exposed could represent something having to do with an emotional level kind of thing, right? Because I'm seeing it as our heart center, our heart chakra, that kind of thing. So it may be something about, potentially exposing something of an emotional nature, possibly within that exposure, that bigger exposure, right? It may be something having to do with exposing something that is potentially emotional. And are we willing to be vulnerable enough to do that? The whole idea of being naked or a figure being somewhat nude, for me, symbolically represents vulnerability besides exposure, right? So it could just be a matter of, thinking long and hard about being vulnerable. It could even be that we have to work through issues around vulnerability. Remember, the suit of blades can represent problems, difficulties, and challenges, right? So there may be some challenge that some of us in the collective are experiencing when it comes to the idea of being vulnerable, right? And that could come from a past emotional difficulty, right? And that may be produced a more logical, rational, analytical way of looking at life, right? Because maybe we've closed ourselves off emotionally, right? So it could just be a matter of, maybe getting more in touch with our feelings, but it starts with making the decision to do that, right? So the other thing I will say, and this is maybe more metaphysical, because I always like to throw that out there as possibilities. When I get the Queen of Blades on an esoteric or metaphysical level, it could be about energy work, and it could be about, energy work that helps us create better flow in our lives. So to give you a specific example, sometimes this card is about the art and science of feng shui. So it could be like somebody's literally taking up that particular study, or that may be to help create better energy flow in your life on all levels. This card may suggest working with a feng shui practitioner. So that's the last thing I will say about the Queen of Blades. As always, when I do these readings, the outer cards may offer more information about the center card. So let's take a look at the card that I talked about at the beginning of this segment, which is the origin card. So here we have the Nine of Wands. Okay, so what I'm seeing here, I'm going to go with maybe the more challenging or problematic aspects of the Queen of Blades that I mentioned with this card. Sometimes this card can be about feeling like we've been through it. This card can be about going through a challenge, going through the constant struggles in life, and we are feeling battle weary, right? That kind of thing. Also, too, we may be in a position where we are waiting for the other shoe to drop, kind of thing, right? So we may be in a place of pause, like we've gotten through a challenge, we're in the state of pause, and in our minds, we may be thinking about the potential for the next challenge to come, and we're just waiting for it, kind of thing, right? This card, if you understand what I've said about the challenges, feeling like life as you know it right now is one continual challenge after another, after another, after another. In the positive sense, this card wants to remind you that you are a survivor, right? If you feel like you've gone through multiple challenges and you've gotten to the other side of each one of those, this card is saying that you are actually stronger than you're giving yourself credit for. This card is about spiritual strength, right? Or inner strength, if you are not spiritually minded. Then it's about inner strength, that even though you've gone through it, you're a survivor, right? I hear two songs in my mind, because you know that sometimes I hear music. If you've watched this channel long enough, you know that I sometimes hear songs in my head when I'm doing these readings. This card brings to mind two. So I'm going to date myself with both. So the first one is a song by Elton John, I'm Still Standing, right? And it talks about being a survivor and being strong, right? So that's the first one. The other one is by Destiny's Child. Yes, I said Destiny's Child. And of course, it's the song Survivor, right? So those two songs usually come to mind. And as I'm talking about both those songs, my crown chakra is tingling. So for somebody, it may be in your best interest to kind of maybe Google, or even since we're here on YouTube, to YouTube those two songs and sit and actually listen to the lyrics. Because the message of either one song or both songs is going to be particularly significant or relevant, or you may have a strong resonance to those. Like, it's striking me like if somebody takes the time to do that, you may come after that and saying, or come out of those listening experiences saying, I really needed to hear the messages in those songs. So I'm just going to offer that for your consideration if you're feeling like taking that on. But I feel for some people that they may benefit from giving those songs a listen. And I mean really listening to the words. Right? So there is that. With the Nine of Wands, in addition to that, this card can also represent kind of a period where we are getting ready for something or getting prepared for something, right? And it could be that, we're getting ourselves prepared to make that decision that I talked about with the Queen of Blades, right? Because the figure is looking this way, right? So that's future oriented, right? Facing the future, that kind of thing. And it could even be like in the moment you may be thinking like, I don't know what to do here because I'm looking at the figure with the bandage around his head, and it's like the idea about like trying to wrap your head around something. Get the pun, right? So it could be a matter of like, we're needing to sit and think about it, because in the moment right now we can't wrap our heads around either whatever the situation is or whatever it is that we're feeling called or led or guided to kind of move towards, right? So there is that I want to offer. Okay. So the other thing that I want to say, and I'm going to come back to what I talked about with the Queen of Blades about, this idea about being vulnerable and being exposed, and maybe, maybe having had a particularly challenging emotional experience, and as a result of that, we've kind of shut ourselves down. Okay. With that in mind, the Nine of Wands is, as the opening card, is saying that maybe we're moving through a time where we are going to be taking a look at our defenses, and this is the psychologist in me coming out, our defenses and our defense mechanisms, right? This card can suggest that maybe the defense mechanisms that we have chosen to adopt or put into practice are not in our best and highest good in terms of helping us cope with life's circumstances, right? So it could just be a matter of things are happening to get you kind of maybe take a closer look at those defense mechanisms, right? Sometimes for me, this card can be like we put walls up between us and other people. Remember, I talked about this card about being estranged, an estrangement, yeah? So sometimes we put walls up. The walls do two things. The walls keep people out, which is why we create them, we put them up. But they also keep us in, right? So it could just be a matter of something may be happening and you're being called, led, or guided to start dismantling the walls that you have put up, which means that you also may have to consider getting to the root or the causation or the origin point. Now remember, this is about the origin, right? This card was the origin position. Getting to the origin of what that particular hurt or wound, that experience that caused you to erect those walls, right? So this may be a time where the walls are coming down, and it may be somewhat challenging. It may not be easy to do, right? If you spent time putting the walls up, they're not going to come down overnight, right? So it could just be a matter of taking time, and I'm going to offer being gentle with yourself if you're going to take that on, right? But life could be presenting to you that it's time for you to take a look at your defense mechanisms and consider whether or not they are still serving and supporting you. These cards are making me feel like that may no longer be the case. And would you be willing to start taking those walls down? Okay, I'm going to move on to the card in between these two. And here we have the Queen of Cups. So now the first thing I will say, here we have two queens, right? So the queen, like I talked about with the Queen of Blades, it could represent actual women. So now here we have a situation with two women in particular, right? One who's in touch with her feelings. Cups is the suit of feelings. One who's in touch with her mind. Suit of Blades, right? So two different types of women here, right? So there is that. It could also be queens as an aspect of ourselves. This is about getting more in touch with our feminine nature. And so this is regardless of gender. We are all masculine and feminine within our own physical bodies, you know. So there is that. So it doesn't matter your gender, right? This could be more getting in touch with our feminine nature, right? It could also be about, you know, expressing, more caring and more nurturing qualities, traits, attributes as we move through this time period, right? This could be about caring. I'm being told to say this could be about caring for ourselves as well as caring for other people, because the Queen of Cups is the most domesticated out of all the queens. She's like mom, right? So it could either be, you know, we are working on rectifying or resolving issues that we have around mom or maternal type figures in our lives, right? But it starts with being more caring for yourself, caring and nurturing, right? And then as you care and nurture for yourself, it would put you in a better place or position to be more caring and nurturing of other people. It makes me feel like maybe people have spent, and I'm talking about people who are watching this video, not everyone, but maybe some people who are watching this video at this moment have spent a great deal of time and energy caring and nurturing for other people at the expense of themselves. And I'm feeling like this is a chance where maybe we get to do that differently, right? And not leave ourselves out of the mix, right? I'm seeing that. Now, the other thing I will say is that with the Nine of Wands, and I'm seeing the figure with his head wrapped, and then the Queen of Cups can talk about our intuition, right? So there may be something that somebody's exploring regarding their intuitive development. Here's the thing. If we're talking about our intuition works through our feeling nature, which is maybe why we have two queens, right? So it could be a matter of, if you want to maybe foster a greater intuitive development, it may be more about getting out of your head and more into your heart, right? And so I'm seeing that. With the Queen of Cups, I'm taking a step back. Okay, the only other thing I will say about the Queen of Cups is that, again, going with the idea about intuition, this could be about exploring more metaphysical or esoteric modalities where they maybe require some growth and development of your intuitive faculties, right? So, for instance, she can represent a person who works with dreams. She can represent a person who works with tarot. She can represent a person who maybe delves into astrology or numerology, any of the metaphysical sciences, right? But I usually see dreams specifically and tarot or some other divination system where the tool helps us focus our intuitive faculties, right? Helps us foster growth in that area, right? So I'm seeing that with the Queen of Cups as the last possibility here. So that's what I would say too. But I think the biggest message I'm seeing here is that this is an opportune time for some of us in the collective to kind of get out of our heads, get more in touch with our feelings, right? And that would help us, especially with the healing of a particular emotional challenge, especially if it's kind of caused us to close our hearts, right? In a way, we did it to protect ourselves, right? But we may be moving beyond that form of protection. Okay. So now I'm going to move to the other side of the line here. So let's take a look at the card next to the Queen of Blades. And here we have, oh my goodness, here we have the High Priestess, one of my favorite tarot cards in the deck. So I love the fact that she mirrors the Queen of Cups. The first thing I will say is that when the Queen of Cups and the High Priestess come up together, this could be about, taking a deeper dive into the metaphysical world, into mystical knowledge, esoteric wisdom, things like that. Exploring that more. She's all about working with our intuition, our psychic faculties. My crown chakra is tingling as I'm saying that. So what that means is, for those people who are really ready to take a deeper dive, it may be that you are working on your chakras specifically. And if that's the case, I'm going to come back to the Queen of Blades for a minute because this thought is popping in. It could be a matter of chakra clearing, right? Remember I talked about energy work and energy clearing, right? So in this particular case, somebody could consider the idea of either chakra clearing or alignment with the chakras or chakra balancing, something having to do with the chakras. But doing that work would allow you to be more open and receptive for spirit, and that's the spirit of your understanding, right? Because we all call spirit different things, right? For the spirit of your understanding to drop or download some wisdom that would help you move through life, right? It's akin to taking either esoteric wisdom or mystical knowledge and practically applying it to your life so that you can see it work, right? Now, another thing with the High Priestess, and I'm going to go with the idea that she's coming after the Queen of Blades, this could be about, reclaiming some aspect of yourself that you lost. Because sometimes for me, the High Priestess can represent the recovery of something that we've lost, right? She's also about independence, right? So we have this thing about maybe moving through an experience where we are needing to take a look at walking a fine line between being overly dependent and uber independent, right? So there maybe is like a fine line because sometimes a High Priestess can represent like the middle of two extremes, the middle of two polar opposites, right? So there is that to consider as well. But it could just be a matter of maybe moving through an experience where you, at the end result, learn a greater sense of independence. Okay, so now, since I talked about this being the time period of Yule, I will offer that maybe for my more witchy or pagan people out there, my peeps, then the High Priestess is an obvious nod that maybe you are going to be either one or two things. Either that you are going to be working with a priestess in a spiritual tradition. Remember, I started with High Priestess being about mystical or esoteric or metaphysical knowledge, right? So if we go with that, then it could be about, working with a priestess who may be aligned with a particular spiritual path or tradition, and you want to be, the word that's coming to me in my mind is that you wanted to be initiated into that process, right? Remember now, I talked about the Nine of Wands being about getting ready or being prepared, right? So the initiatory stage or phase is about getting you ready, right? Getting you prepared to walk into that spiritual path or spiritual tradition, right? But it's about working under or with or in collaboration with a priestess in particular, right? So there is that. Or that maybe you are contemplating becoming a priestess in your particular spiritual path or tradition. And of course, in the High Priestess is a nod to kind of move that forward. Yeah, so that's what I'm seeing with that. Now, for people who are magical practitioners, the High Priestess can be about being mindful about polarization, right? Because you go with the idea that in most depictions, a high priestess is seen between a black pillar and a white pillar, right? And each one they represent polar opposites. They represent polarity, duality, right? And the high priestess sits between the two pillars, right? So this could just be a matter of coming to a place where you understand that duality is an important part of your magical path or tradition, and it's really about being in the middle of those two polarities or the duality. Um, I'm following a guy right now on YouTube, and his name is Frater X. And one of the things he talks about as a magical practitioner is this idea about being depolarized, right? So now I'm going somewhere with this because I'm connecting the dots here. So, so it's about sitting in the middle of the two poles, right? So if you are a magical practitioner, this could be about you working through a state of becoming, or working towards becoming, I should say, depolarized. So the idea here with that is about being more mindful or becoming more aware of your triggers, right? And so it's about working through the things that trigger us. And then we become, as we become more aware of what our triggers are, and we work to change our reactions and response to those triggers, we become more depolarized, right? We become more neutral, right? The idea for me when I think of depolarization, I think of becoming neutral, right? So we become neutral, right? So I'm seeing that with the high priestess, and I usually equate that to a more magical practice or tradition because that's how I learned about this idea. But if you take the magic out of that, it could be a matter of you just taking on the idea that you are going to work really hard on your reactions and your responses to the things that have triggered you in the past, right? And that would be, again, maybe we've created defense mechanisms because of certain triggers in our world, right? And so, and the other thing with that too, it's a matter of, if I even go deeper with that, it's a matter of the outer world won't change its response to you. You have to be willing to learn to change your response to the outer world. So just give that some thought, right? I'm just going to let that seep in and percolate, right? But that's what I'm seeing with the high priestess. Again, she can represent, taking a deeper dive into the mystical world, the spiritual world, right? For some people, that may be about, becoming more aware of, spirit or the spiritual world and spirits. You are actively working on engaging with spirits or spirit communication. That's mediumship, right? There's that. Or even if it's not about mediumship in the sense where we're talking to those who may have crossed over, right? It could be a matter of just connecting with higher level spiritual entities and beings. In my particular case, I'm an angel person, so I always love when the angels come in and I can feel their presence, that kind of thing. So there may be some aspects of that, right? But again, it's also rooted in being open and receptive, right? So it's a matter of like, what are you willing to expose yourself to, right? You have to give that some strong thought and consideration. But again, this could just be taking a deeper dive into our metaphysical or our magical practices and traditions, right? Oh, I love the high priestess. Okay, so now moving on to the last card. We have, rounding out the line, we have the Emperor. So the first thing that I notice here is that we have two cards from the major arcana as we move towards the end of the line. So here's the thing that I love. And I love the fact that he is following the high priestess. And added note, he is looking at her, right? So added emphasis with the directional cue, right? I talked about this card representing the idea, two ideas, right? The idea about fostering a greater sense of independence, yeah? And then the other one is about working on becoming more depolarized, right? If we take that under, because now remember, this was about guidance or advice. If we take the advice here, then the Emperor as the end result is about coming into a greater sense of power. This card is about power. It's about authority, right? So the Emperor for me is all about self-empowerment, right? It could be about, the powers that be in the world, right? So this could be about, I talked about it here with maternal figures with the queen. This could be about um, um, male authority figures, you know, patriarchy, that kind of thing. All those kinds of things about, people who are in positions of power, that kind of thing. And with that, maybe part of the depolarization is about maybe looking at the ways in which maybe we feel or believe ourselves to be powerless, right? So it could be about how do we work on reclaiming our own sense of power, right? And it starts with, maybe taking a look at creating a greater sense of independence, right? Sometimes if we're overly dependent on people, we give our power away to those people, right? Sometimes in a negative, challenging sense, that creates codependent relationships. I'm not going to talk too much about that because that really goes towards the psychology aspect, right? And I don't want to get terribly psychological here, but that is something to consider, right? And so and that would be like one end of the spectrum. Remember, I talked about two polar opposites here. I said overly dependent and I said uber independence, right? So those are two polar opposites, right? Coming back to the high priestess, about how can we come to the middle ground, right? But either way, however we choose to approach it, this card is about coming back into our power, right? This card can be about taking control of our lives, right? So for some people during this Yule season, as it comes to the end of 2021 too, the beginning of 2022, it's about getting our lives under control, doing what we need to do. And it could even be with that gaining a greater sense of discipline. Maybe in order for us to get our lives under control, we have to be disciplined about it, right? We have to really be willing to do the work, right? So there is that. It's about laying a foundation. It's about rolling up our sleeves, whether literally or metaphorically, and getting our hands dirty, again, literally or metaphorically, and doing our work, right? But the end result is if we choose to do that, it's about gaining our power back. It's about self-empowerment, right? And for some people, with the independence aspect of the high priestess, it's about becoming the best authority on your life. Maybe other people have been dictating how you should be living your life, and now you're just coming to a greater sense of awareness about like, no, I'm the best authority on me. I'm going to be the one who dictates what my life is going to look like and how I'm going to choose to live it. Whew, that's powerful right there, right? And so the other thing I will say, as I'm looking at the emperor and the high priestess together, and I'm going to end on this note, is that I notice that they each bear the sign of the cross. Okay, so now the cross, of course, is a spiritual symbol and most noted with Christianity. Okay, so now I'm going to go metaphysical with the idea of the cross. The cross can also symbolize, and I'm coming back full circle to the Queen of Blades in this moment, right? The cross can symbolize what we need to cancel out, cross out, negate, or eliminate. Yeah? And so what do we need to cross out? What do we need to eliminate? What do we need to negate that would allow us to come back into a greater sense of personal power? That is a food for thought question, and I'm going to end the reading on that note. And so as I wrap up, this is James Himm Mitchell, and if you made it to the end of this video, I want to say thank you so much for giving me the gift of your time and your attention. I hope you got something of value out of this particular reading experience. And as I wrap up, I invite you to join me in the same space for another reading experience somewhere down the line. So until then, I'm wishing you a wonderful day, and I'm wishing those of you who are going to be celebrating Yule with me a wonderful Yule. Take care, and blessed be.